there are these end-of-life studies. The two big regrets are chances not taken and love left on the table. Loneliness is as toxic to our health as smoking to 15 cigarettes a day, and other cardiological measures. It's the quality of our love that is really predictive of us living long lives. We know unequivocally that there are certain feel-good chemicals: oxytocin, the cuddle chemical, serotonin, dopamine. And one of the things that we know for sure is that holding and hugging someone we love for 40 seconds will release more of those feel-good chemicals when we're doing it with somebody who really matters. It can be a very efficient way for us to reconnect after we feel disconnected.
Hello and welcome to the FitMind podcast, where we talk about mental well-being, mental fitness, and neuroscience. I'm your host, Josh, and I hope you enjoy this incredible episode with Dr. Adam Dorsay. He's an executive coach and psychologist based in Silicon Valley. I think we can all agree we're at the most technologically advanced and connected stage of humanity's development. However, personally, we're all feeling extremely disconnected. This incredible episode is really about how we cultivate those connections and how we increase our well-being through doing so. I honestly had such a good time today. I'm so grateful that you're here with us. Adam, welcome to the FitMind podcast.
Josh, I am thrilled to be with you all the way on the other side of the globe.
Indeed. The beauty of the internet. So connection is a word that we hear often, but I think it's extremely misunderstood even by myself. In your work, you discuss the 4 types of connection, and I think we all know we live in a very disconnected world. There's kind of the irony of technology hyperconnecting us, but also we feel ourselves extremely disconnected. So I wonder, how would you define connection?
I'm so glad you asked. To your point, it's a nebulous term. And the reason I decided to even explore what it means and how to view it through the 4 lenses through which I view it was because everybody's talking about this nebulous term called connection. And there are books about how to connect with your partner, how to connect with your clients, how to connect with your children. But what about all of the ways that we connect? So I came up with a working 2-page definition that was the byproduct of me and about 10 other licensed mental health professionals. And the basic summary is it's what makes us come alive. And you know it when it's there. There's no way to fake it. When you hear music that changes your life and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, I just heard something. I can't believe I just heard it. Or you see art, or you meet somebody, or you have an experience perhaps at a particular location and you just know this is a very special location. You know it when you feel it. And for each of us, our connections are entirely unique. For example, my father, who could go his entire life without touching an animal. I can barely get through a day without touching a cat or a dog. I need to be around them. My father really couldn't care less. He could sit through a 6-hour Wagnerian opera, and I would consider it a very expensive place to sleep. So we all have different connection formulas. You and I, if we got into it over a pint somewhere, we would probably find that there's a lot of confluence between the things that turn us on, and there would be probably certain differences. And the interesting thing is, oftentimes we go down what I kind of call just a false path. We're told we should do this thing. We're told we should like this thing. Andre Agassi, who's one of the world's greatest tennis players ever, hated playing tennis. He was good at playing tennis, hated it. And in my work as a psychologist working with kind of the alpha men of Silicon Valley, many of these guys will tell me, oh my gosh, dude, you know what? I did all the right things. I went to the Ivy League schools. I got all the right jobs and internships. I ascended the ladder and I'm good at it, but I hate it. And I married the so-called, I felt kind of pressured to get married. It was kind of, I was told to, there's an American expression, I don't know if it translates into England English or Aussie English, but if I may swear for a moment, this is a direct quote. They tell me that they felt pressure to get into marriage because they were told they shit or get off the pot. So they felt some cognitive dissonance as they pursued the marriage, and they decided to lean into hope. I hope it will be okay. I hope it will work out. I hope she will change. I hope I will change. I hope we will grow together. Hey, you know what maybe we should do? We should throw a baby into it. Maybe that'll make things better. And that has worked. For those of us who had babies, we now know you better have a really strong foundation for a baby to be okay, because you throw a baby in and suddenly, I mean, things get much, much harder, and the previously existing tensions become way more tense. So I'm working with these guys who have never really, really checked in with themselves. Like, who am I and where am I going? And who do I want to bring with me? They haven't really, really thought about that. They thought about, how to answer certain questions on exams or interviews, but they haven't really thought about how they connect with themselves. So the primary connection is, well, with ourselves, knowing thyself. I mean, it's as old as the ancient Greeks and goes beyond that, I'm sure. But knowing thyself is the starting point, is the nucleus of all connections. And it's not self-absorption, it's not narcissism to get to know who you are and what you're about and what you want. Of course, if we spend all of our time doing that, that would be highly problematic. During the time of Jesus, there was a Jewish scholar by the name of Hillel, and he said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And so it's kind of this tight equilibrium that we're walking. Like, I gotta be for myself. I can't only be for myself, but I definitely gotta be for myself as well. And as it goes outwards, as it ripples outwards, the second form of connection is how we connect with others. Could be how I connect with my wife, my kids, how I'm connecting with you, Josh. And I also throw in pets, how we connect with our animals, because we now know scientifically that our pets are not just these, little beings. They're people. They're not people, to be clear, but they're beings who mean a lot to us and give us huge, huge health benefits. The third level of connection is how we connect with the world. How do we connect with our work? How do we connect with art? How do we connect with uh, nature? How do we connect with our ancestry? And the fourth is something greater. For some people, that means traditional religion. For the most orthodox of atheists, even they would have to agree that when they go someplace like to the Grand Canyon or to Bali or wherever it might be, they experience awe, AWE. They experience something greater than themselves. It's like, wow. Go to Stonehenge, and it's like, what is going on here? I imagine that's not terribly far from where you're originally from. The entire book was investigating what is connection and how can each person cultivate their own connection formula and really consider these four areas of connection.
You put that extremely eloquently, and I don't think I've actually ever heard it put so beautifully.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just to see them and isolate them, it just helps bring in some inspiration and definitely helps, define it. The 2 pages is impressive to write on connection. So well done. At FitMind, we put a lot of emphasis on heart-based meditation in particular. That's kind of the core practice that we sort of teach. Anecdotally, I did a retreat not long ago. It was on the Buddhist 4 immeasurables. And then, to my complete surprise, I noticed my outlook and connection with people and the world, even when I wasn't meditating, had substantially changed and increased. And then, shortly after, I read Richard Davidson's book on the science of meditation, and he'd found that in some of his studies that the heart-based meditations were changing the default mode network, which is kind of the structure in the brain that's active when we're not really doing too much. We're just kind of in a wakeful rest or something like that. So that set off a bit of a light bulb for me on the importance of connection and how you can change just your resting state. I mean, we can all look back at when we were children, and we don't feel the same as we do now. As you're saying, the awe was just there always. Whatever we were doing, there was just this connection, to put it into words. So yeah, from your perspective, how does the neuroscience intersect with enhancing connection and emotional well-being?
Sure. Well, I can't really speak to this strict neuroscience, and I didn't really address that, but I can tell you, for example, we know unequivocally that there are certain feel-good chemicals. We talk a lot about oxytocin, the cuddle chemical, serotonin, and dopamine, and others. And one of the things that we know for sure is that holding and hugging someone we love for, I believe, 40 seconds, which actually feels very long when you do it for the first time. It feels much harder to do. It's like it can feel so intimate. It can feel almost uncomfortable. A person can become very self-conscious in the midst of this, but it will release more of those feel-good chemicals when we're doing it with somebody who really matters. Um, and it can be a very efficient way for us to reconnect after we feel disconnected. So one of the ways that we try to reconnect is we argue. And if they just understand my point, now I'm not saying that's not important. Of course it is. But we often go about it by bludgeoning the other and being more committed to being right than being loved. And one of the things we know neuroscientifically is that that doesn't really work. That doesn't foster the kind of interpersonal neurobiology, to use kind of a Siegel. Dan Siegel talks a lot about this interpersonal neurobiology, where your neurobiology and my neurobiology somehow come together in some way. Obviously, not in every which way, but there is, within that kind of Venn diagram, there is some overlap. And one of the things that Stan Tatkin taught me is that couples who go belly to belly, literally touching bellies, because there's so many nerve endings there, is another quick way to restore connection. He even talks about feet touching, which I thought was fascinating. But one of the things that we really long for in this life, where we feel so alone, I mean, we think about Jean-Paul Sartre and like you're born alone and you die alone and you're alone throughout life. And one of the things we know for sure is that loneliness is detrimental to our health. And so what we're constantly looking for is that other, that other who's going to save the day for us. And that is very important. But start by knowing thyself. Know who you're looking for. And one of the things that I also really advise the people who see me when they're considering marriage is to look through 3 organs, and in this order. Start with your head, because it has got to make sense. It has got to make sense intellectually that the two of you are a match. If the two of you think that it's going to be, like it's all heart connection, and she wants to live in New York and I want to live in California, and she wants 5 babies and I want no babies, but we love each other, and correspondingly, as we go down, the heart and the nether regions are absolutely madly in love, we think it's all going to work out. And that's where I get into the whole idea of, leveraging hope as a strategy, which does not work. And that's why I say we got to start with the head. And I'm so grateful that before I met my wife, I wrote down, based on my own actual lived experience, what worked and what didn't work, what were deal breakers, what were deal makers, what were non-starters. I wrote them all down. That was one column, and the second column was like what was very important, negotiable but super important. And in the third column, I wrote down, it would be really nice if, uh, funnily, it would be very nice if she enjoyed watching like the Lord of the Rings with me, or if she was a sports fan like I was. My wife is neither of those things. And we are 22 years married very happily, because the first column, the the heady stuff, the non-negotiables, they were all there. The important stuff also was mostly pretty much all there. And the peripheral stuff was not. And you know, I really strongly recommend that all three organs be green lighting the marriage or the union, because with one of those three is not working, it's not going to work. If the head's not working, it's going to be a problem. If the heart's not working, it's going to be a problem. If the other regions aren't working, we know it's going to be a problem. And I see a lot of that when I ask people, like, how's your sex life? And they look at me and say, oh yeah, it's been about, they look at their watch. Oh, it's been about 8 years since last Tuesday. It's like, and that's a problem. So anyway, I really, I'm really trying to, I do believe that society, our children, everybody will be much happier if they're able to listen to those three data sources, brain, heart, and nethers, because all three have to green light the union. And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because sometimes it means I have to say goodbye. And a lot of people don't sustain the discomfort of anywhere from, 4 days to 4 months of grief, and instead they stay together for 4 decades and they are miserable. And you and I both know about this. We've been around these couples. We've seen the movies where there's this kind of quiet violence as a byproduct. Many of them originate from your country of origin. Many of these English movies have these biting couples talking to each other, and you can tell that they detest each other, but they're going to stay until they're in the grave. Anyway, I really want people to live a life that they love, that they feel is correct, even if they have to do the uncomfortable along the way.
I just wanted to jump in and say that these episodes, the podcast and the courses, are brought to you by the NGO FitMind. FitMind is a non-profit organization that now exists entirely off your kindness and donations. Whether you have the ability to support us financially or not, we really appreciate any help, whether it's just hitting the like and subscribe button. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the episode. That feels intuitively a great practice to do. I wonder what you put on your list and how you would approach doing that, because that feels like a great exercise, particularly in relationships, even in friendships. I think is a great, and everyone is a work in progress. So I think having the separate lists is excellent, and also there's a forgiveness element that comes in there, and there's the opportunity for other people to change. There's just there's a lot to unpack there.
Love that, Josh. I even remember where I was sitting when I wrote my list, when I was in my bachelor pad. I had just parted ways with a very lovely person who was just beautiful and kind and just all wrong for me. And I remember her looking at me and saying, "You're never going to find any better than me." And I said, "Hey, I got to try." And lo and behold, she ended up marrying somebody who was a far better match for her than me. And I had done her a favor, even though at the moment she didn't think I did, because I would not have been her person. So one of the top ones was I needed to be with somebody who was very psychologically minded, somebody who was very emotionally intelligent. I also knew I needed to be with somebody who I traveled well with. I needed to travel really well with whomever it was. Travel, by the way, is one of the things I recommend. I particularly recommend that if a couple is considering marriage, travel someplace where things are going to go badly, where things consistently either show up on time, where there might be lost luggage, because you'll see how the two of you problem solve as a couple. Do you come together in the face of problems? Because a lot of people go to someplace lovely like Tahiti or to, an all-inclusive, romantic getaway, and they think, oh my gosh, marriage is going to be great. That's not predictive of marriage at all. Marriage is a series of addressing challenges along the way, when things go slightly sideways, and how well do the two of you team up. To borrow from Stan Tatkin, who says it's almost like the two of you are in a buddy cop film in life. Do each of you have each other's back? So I wanted somebody who was emotionally intelligent. I wanted somebody with whom I traveled well. I wanted somebody who was of yeah, I'll say it, of my faith, who was also I'm Jewish, and I didn't want to have to explain myself all the time. I'm not super religious or anything like that, but I observe some of the holidays. I deal with some of the customs, and I didn't want it challenged all the time. I didn't. I wanted somebody who just got it. So that was a criterion for me. Um, there were several others. I knew I wanted someone who had a healthy lifestyle, a non-smoker, somebody who might engage in some drinking but not too much, um, and and for sure she had to be a pet lover. Like there was no ifs, ands, or buts. um, so that was who I was, and I needed somebody with whom I was intellectually compatible, who, where the conversations wouldn't end. Um, so these were the important things to me. Uh, Not the important. These were the these were the non-negotiables for me.
Yeah, amazing. That feels like a great practice and one that I should go away and do myself at some point soon. When I hear it often, to know thyself, and it feels in many ways to be the foundation for the four types of connections that you're mentioning. What would you recommend to know thyself? Because I feel like it's not super intuitive in that way that it's spoken, although I can think of a few ways to do it.
Sure. So there are a lot of ways to do this. One of them is psychotherapy. I'm a big fan of it. I've don't just provide it. I've done a lot of it myself, and I continue to do it, and to great effect. I will die an unfinished I will die an unfinished project, and I'm committed to that. I'm committed to running downfield. I'll say with a rugby ball on an endless runway, because there's no end to this self-discovering, to learning, to improving. I want to be better in the areas that matter, and there are many ways to get there. One of them is through reading a lot. One of in and One of them is through journaling a lot. Psychotherapy, as I mentioned, another way. Asking evocative questions, and having evocative questions asked to you in a safe environment. There are these big talk questions that I'm a big fan of. We engage in so much small talk; it's crap. I mean, do guys go out for beer? They traditionally will talk about at least one of three topics. Generally speaking, it'll be sports, politics, or tech. Maybe, those are the big ones that they'll talk about, sadly. Will they really talk about, hey, what are you longing for in this lifetime? Like, what really matters to you? And sometimes they will feel ashamed to try to talk about it. Sometimes they will feel externally shamed. And what does that do? It blunts the tool. We suddenly stop drilling for that data. And it's really sad, but boys are born more emotionally expressive than their female counterparts, except they learn through socialization to stop. By well-meaning authorities, I would imagine they're well-meaning, because they're trying to say, hey, listen, if you want to get jumped into the gang, if you want to be part of, the guy club, you can't do this because you sound like a girl, or some homophobic term will be thrown out. And the fact of the matter is, that is no way to raise a person, regardless of gender. We need our emotions for data. And one of the things we also know is that if you take the emotional centers out of a human brain, we've seen this, that person will not be able to make decisions, because emotions are a factor in all decisions. So one of the things that I would want to do is to help a person figure out their method. It might be through external conversation. It might be through contemplation. Um, One of my favorite ways to attain data is looking at your life in reverse and saying, "Oh my gosh, what can I learn from these experiences, and what did they mean about me?" One of my favorite movies of all time, as it relates to considering whom you're going to marry, is High Fidelity with John Cusack. You see him kind of go through all of his relationships, seeing what worked and what didn't work. And that's how I came up with my list of like my 3 columns of the must-haves, very important and would be nice, was through real data and real data analyzed. I've heard themes and variations, but wisdom is either, looking at bad judgment and really analyzing it well, or just any real good data analysis and asking yourself, what does this mean? What can I learn? And asking that maybe many times about the same thing, because it's almost like a tea bag. You can still get more out of it after each, hot water pour. So I would really recommend that people get to know who they are before they decide to say, yes, I decide to attach myself to another.
In that sense, the first two types of connection are blending into each other. So there's this process of self-discovery, and then, as you said, and I notice it myself as I do, as I isolate and see those particular, it might be a pattern that's maybe not useful, and then I begin to start to work on that. If I then, there'll often be a fear of me telling friends, or there'll be like this fear of vulnerability or whatever it might be. But when I do tell them, I feel relieved for one, like the connection increases. And then the knowing thyself is then building connection with someone else. And then I notice straight away that people trust you more because you're talking about like what you're not just necessarily painting this false picture of um, yourself, and you're being maybe more realistic and vulnerable. And yeah, it is true. And actually, I think there's been a big change with my friendship group recently that we will talk about those things. And in our practice, we will be looking at and trying to replace those, usually through a meditation practice. We'll be replacing those patterns. We'll be letting go of the negative thought patterns and then bringing up often a feeling of loving kindness or mindfulness or awareness or whatever it might be. What about the other two? How would they look as practices, the third and fourth types of connection?
Before I even get into that, I just want to say, unfortunately, there are some groups of people who will roll their eyes when you share something very vulnerable or say TMI, which stands, at least out you know TMI. TMI stands for too much information. And TMI is a great way of really shaming a human being. It's terrible to say. I've never said TMI to anyone ever. Now, it doesn't mean that there are times when somebody does overshare. Of course, there are people who overshare, and I'm not endorsing oversharing. What I am endorsing instead is making small bids and building up and finding out what is the degree to which we can share mutually. What's the degree to which I can upload from you? I should say upload to you and download from you. Um, I heard it said very beautifully by a colleague of mine who was speaking of a British psychoanalyst who described mental health. He said, essentially, Donald Winnicott said, something akin to true mental health can be demonstrated by sharing yourself with another and having the capacity to take in another person's experience. And I think that's excellent. So that's thing one. Thing two is vulnerability. Vulnerability, as you were speaking of, is the precursor to courage. We now know for sure. It's like people say, oh, God, that guy's fearless. He's so courageous. Well, if he's fearless, he's not courageous. You have to have fear to have courage. For me to jump out of an airplane with a parachute, of course, not with that one, but with a parachute, would be extremely scary, would require incredible bravery and courage. It would be a very vulnerable experience for me. I would be terrified. But for a seasoned paratrooper who's done it 1,005 times to do it 1,006th, no courage needed, no fear. But for them to go to therapy might be very courageous. They may not have ever done that. Okay, so we'll talk about the next two levels of so connecting with. So we've talked about others, connecting to the world. So we're talking about things like connecting with art, connecting with nature, connecting with work, connecting with our ancestry. We only have so much time in this lifetime, and many of us think somehow that we are exempt from death. We don't recognize that everything we decide to do or decide not to do has consequences. And one of the things we know for sure is that there are these end of life studies where people have regrets. The two big regrets that I know of, at least, are chances not taken and love left on the table. And for the world, chances not taken are often in the professional zone. I know unequivocally that if I did not pursue a doctorate in psychology, on my deathbed, I would have regretted it. I was told from a very young age that I had no business even trying to do such a thing because I was dyslexic and I mean, I still am dyslexic, and had ADHD of the inattentive type, which meant I would be staring out the window. I wouldn't be, swinging from a chandelier, to borrow a great lyric from Sia. I wouldn't be doing that, but I would uh, be completely spaced out. And I'm so glad I leaned into it and did the risky thing. So one of the things that I needed to do to connect with that reality was to ask myself, do I love my work? Is there a way for me to love my work? Because some people don't have the luxury. I realize many people don't have the luxury to leave their work, but there may be a new way for them to lean into it. And one of the classics is finding meaning within that work by exercising vocational muscle that matters to you. So one of the real benefits of positive psychology is we've looked at the 24 virtues or the character strengths. And if you can find out what yours are, you can ask yourself, how can I exercise those here at work? There's a story told by Seligman, Martin Seligman, who's one of the fathers of positive psychology, where he's describing a single mother who, not by choice, but by absolute desperation and need, was a waitress at a restaurant, and she did not like it. She was educated, she didn't want to do it, but being a single mother, that was what she was relegated to do, and she was not good at doing it. Her shifts felt endless, and she got crappy tips because no one wanted her serving them because they could feel how much that she didn't like it. Well, when she took into account what her actual character strengths were, and one of them was interpersonal intelligence, she began to learn who her customers were. She began to really get to know her coworkers, and lo and behold, her customers began to love her. The regulars were just like so stoked to see her. Her coworkers were stoked to have her on a shift. A 4-hour shift, which previously felt like 24 hours for her, felt like less than an hour because time would go by so quickly because she experienced flow. Time which she was immersed in it, time just went by quickly, and her tips went up. And when it finally came time for her to leave the job, she was actually sad to leave the job. Now, I could have done that, perhaps, in my corporate job, and I did, in fact, use that technology while I was there. I got to know my customers really well. I of course got to know my colleagues really well, and I got to like aspects of it. But the problem for me was I wasn't leveraging all of my loves and interests. And I did have, I will say, both the privilege as well as taking a risk, because I didn't know how it would go. As I told you offline, I was making, for 2 years, I was making $10 an hour with no benefits. We had to take a home equity line of credit out on my home on the gamble that I would love being a psychologist, but I was sure I'd love it. And lo and behold, I did. It was a big risk, and I'm glad I did it. By marrying so well, coincidentally, I happen to have married a psychologist. So not only did I get the emotional intelligence from her, from a scholastic level, but she was also a very well integrated, deeply, intelligent, profoundly emotionally intelligent person. And she also wanted to support me when I did this daring thing. And she wanted to bet on me, and I'm glad she did. The ROI has been huge. So one of the ways that we do this is we evaluate, like how much are we loving our work? How much can we find a way to perhaps learn more at work if we can't leave our job? How can we lean into the musculature we want to grow while we're there? Is there more to learn? Can we look at our .com job as a .edu job, like as a well-paid internship? Personally, as a psychologist, I'm constantly learning. When my wife and I even go on vacation, I am stacked with books. But I would say I listen to at least one psychology book a week. I have a psychology podcast. I'm constantly speaking with the best and the brightest in the world and learning from them. I'm committed to learning as much as I can in this within this profession. So that's something I would ask everybody to do as they connect with work. Connecting with ancestry, very important. Maya Angelou once said something akin to, "If you don't know where you're from, you don't know where you're going." Of course, many African American people don't know exactly where they're from because many of the records have been taken away, and many of them go to Africa and learn about customs over there. Many of them speak to their elders and try to find out more about how to, reclaim their identities. One of the reasons that my own Jewish identity is so important to me is because it is cultural. There is something really beautiful, and I don't want it lost on my watch. Many people tried to kill my people throughout history and time in many countries. And I don't want it to die on my watch, and I want my children to know where they are from and have more meaning in their lives as a result of that. And what they do it is up to them. What they do with that is up to them. Um, in terms of nature, I mean, for sure, our brains are the current version are about 35,000 years old, maybe 100,000 years old, but our surroundings have changed dramatically. But you and I both know that when we go someplace beautiful in nature, our caveman brain just says, "Oh my gosh, this is where I belong. This is amazing." Maybe given the creature comforts of modern society, I will not live here underneath this waterfall and in the biting cold and in this cave. But I need to spend more time here to recharge, to renew. My wife, my wife says that my face changes when I'm in nature. Literally, it changes, and you're nodding because a lot of people feel that way. And so, and art, as I mentioned, I can enjoy a shortish opera, but unlike my dad who can do the 6 hour. Um, but for me, there's music that you and I could probably compare notes on, where you and I would be like, "Oh my God, I'm totally into that." And it's important that we listen to the stuff that we're actually into rather than the stuff we're told to be into. When I was growing up, I talk about this in my book, and you're gonna laugh because James Corden did a whole thing on this, but when I was in high school and Wham had just come out, all of the punk rockers in my school and all of the new wavers were clowning on it because it was teeny bopper girls' music. Except for the fact that I freaking loved George Michael's voice. I thought he had a voice of God. And as he grew older, like his stuff was just like unreal. Unreal. Listen Without Prejudice. Are you kidding me? Every song on that album, perfect. There was only one small problem. I was not allowed to come out and let the world know how much I loved him. I had to listen to his music with my windows rolled up, lest somebody look over me and say, "What's wrong with that guy?" I'm absolutely out with it now. I'm glad he was finally accepted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Some of my friends would think that he sucks, and that's fine. We have different connection ideas. When I was growing up, one of my friends was just all about Joe Strummer and the Clash and the Who. I understand their music. I see intellectually why they are good, but I will not be listening to London Calling anytime soon, even though I know all the lyrics. I it's not my jam. But I will listen to Morrissey and the Smiths, and I'll listen to Depeche Mode all day. And he won't. And I know another really divisive one, by the way, Chris Martin and Coldplay. I'm 100% on board. And I know a lot of people who love to hate that guy and that band, and I think they are just brilliant. Anyway, we all have different connection formulas. We must not pretend to be something that we are not. It's so deleterious to our health to pretend. It's like wearing shoes that are three sizes too small and trying to run a marathon. It's not going to work. Oh yeah, and the fourth one. Uh, so I wrote about something greater, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, and I wanted it to be all inclusive, so that whether somebody goes to traditional churches or synagogues, or whether the most hardcore, absolute orthodox atheist were in the same room, they could find some agreement. And anything greater than me fits into that. You and me talking right now, Josh, you and I are creating something greater than me just sitting alone. And tonight's sunset, which is going to occur right now outside this window, I can see it. I know it's already tomorrow in Australia relative to me. It's Wednesday here, Thursday there. But right now, a sunset is happening to the right of me. And there will never be a sunset like it ever again. Last night's sunset may have been similar, but it's not the same. And my son's face is going to change tomorrow, and my face is going to change tomorrow. And you and I both know that we have to be present for these tiny miracles that occur all the time. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel talked about this idea called radical amazement. And while he was alive, we were not studying the science of awe. Since that time, we have been studying awe. And awe, as it turns out, is like gratitude on steroids, and it changes our brains. In fact, when we are in an awestruck phase, when we say, wow, like when I was talking about like Grand Canyon and Stonehenge, when you go there, you say, wow, there are some people who might not, but the majority of people are going to say, wow. And when they say, wow, and when they're blown away by this thing that most of us will be blown away by, if you put our brains under neuroimaging, what we would see is that the same receptors that come alive when we are taking psilocybin, which is the psychoactive element in magic mushrooms, and you're nodding, which we also now know can be very helpful for certain types of trauma treatment. At least it's showing evidence that it may be helpful when done properly. I'm not saying just it's kind of the Wild West right now, and I'm not saying just do it with anybody. But there is promise. Johns Hopkins and the MAPS studies are showing a lot of really great promising data. But without any of the risks of taking in psilocybin, we can experience awe and have the same receptors come alive. And what happens to us when we're in a state of awe is we become less self-conscious. If you and I were to go to a solar eclipse in Oregon like it was in 2017, and my colleague Dr. Jonah Peckett talks about this in his book on awe, strangers are hugging each other because they're not self-conscious. It's like, we're seeing something that's amazing right now. And they're like, I don't know if you remember that whole thing with the guy with the double rainbow. And he's like, oh my God, it's a double rainbow. People were clowning on South Park, made fun of it. I thought it was beautiful because he was in an awestruck state, and he was like a child, and he was in his beauty. I understand that it's funny. I know that it looks silly on the outside, and I understood why it became a meme. But to those of you who are rolling your eyes, and to the haters out there, or the people who are clowning on him, I'm going to tell you this. That dude experienced something magical and spiritual. And I'm going to ask you, are you holding yourself back from experiencing those things in this life? Because if you do, that will be a regret on the deathbed.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I watched a documentary on the Australian sort of oceanic tides. It was relating to a lot about the whales, the fish, the specific, because a lot of the ocean kind of ends up and builds this like random islands and stuff around Australia, and it was just complete. It was very specific, but it just showed the complexity of basically how little we know about the systems, the natural systems, and the biologists in it were just so passionate about this like incredible complexity of nature. And yeah, it just really inspired just a feeling of complete awe about how little we know, even about what's so close to home. Like I think it's about 5% of the ocean has been explored. Like we just know so little.
Dude, I gotta run something by you. I'm forgetting the name of the guy who found the Titanic, but I saw him speak, and he said, NASA and space exploration has, like, I don't remember the number, but it's something like 1,000x of the budget that studying our own world and the submarine life. And I think about that for a second. We like to go out, we don't like to go in. And I thought about that as a mechanism. Like, yeah, people like to think externally and do like the building of the external things, but they don't want to build the internal stuff. They don't want to think about their internal structures, their psyches. It's very similar. And it's been hypothesized that within the ocean are the cures to all of the diseases. It's like there is so much in there if we just would expand the budget and treat the ocean kindly and study her. It's like apparently it's like a treasure chest that is not even been really considered.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because they cover a lot about these underwater forests, which provide massive amounts of oxygen and really affect the environment. And they're trying to rebuild these groves that, I mean, we are obviously we're land creatures, but we're still mammals. We have the mammalian dive reflex. I'm quite into free diving. I'm obsessed with whales, and whales basically provide nutrients to the entire ocean in this kind of 360-degree
I did not know
pattern
that.
just by the poop. It's like
Really?
they're nourishing the ocean. So there was big effects from when we were whaling a lot. And this is, I think, one of the most beautiful representations of how we can rebound and save nature. They banned whaling, and humpbacks in particular have had a massive, I think, at least 80% increase in numbers within sort of 50-ish years. And yeah,
Mm.
that's had a massive effect on the underwater forests and everything down from that, because they're kind of nearly at the top, many ways, top of the food chain, and their poo provides nourishment to the lowest levels, like the plankton and whatnot, and then that moves up to all of the other fish. So yeah, I think ore is just it's such an important element, and you're right, everything is unique. It's the one constant is change. So everything that we see in every moment is entirely unique. So even close to home, the way we feel now, there could be a feeling of awe towards that. It could be difficult, or it could be challenging, or it could be beautiful, but we could still recognize that it's unique and it's constantly changing, and that we are part of nature.
I love that so much, and I'm in awe of what you just said. I mean, I'm sure certain parts of my brain came alive as if I was on psilocybin when you were saying that, because I had no clue about whale poop or the fact that that stopping whaling had caused such a great rebound. Because I only think about all of the crap that's been going on in the ocean that's not been good. And so I'm heartened to hear that there's, in addition to a lot of bad news, there's some good news to be had as well. And it's my hope that more of this consciousness does begin to populate the planet, because we need these structures. I mean, when we cause harm to the earth, boy, we don't know what we are killing and what the repercussions are actually going to be, and they're generally not good.
Definitely. I think it's actually one of the few examples of governments worldwide agreeing on something and then actually effectively creating change quite quickly as well. So you mentioned, and I think it's really important, just work. Um, and you went through this change yourself. How would you recommend that people do find connection in work? How do they make a change as we get older? And I've noticed this myself, and I know there's good science. We become a bit more fixed, and psychedelics, as you mentioned, which obviously have a lot more research to be done. And I'm not recommending they're still illegal in many places, but that there is effective research for them that seems to be showing that I think they're probably going to be extremely important for mental health in future, but also meditation and these other know thyself, the psychotherapy, positive thinking, they all make this change and loosen these self-in structures, which I think make it easier to jump into the fear around changing work. But I wonder how you would recommend that we do change or look at changing work, or even how do we find what we are passionate about? I feel for me, I went through university and nobody was really asking these questions. We didn't
No, they
talk
weren't.
about it. I jumped into it a degree that in hindsight, I was just like, the internet, that's not going anywhere. It was quite money orientated. I mean, it's been a great job, and I think there's been many yeah, there's many things I can do that still help a lot of people. But yeah, I wonder how you would recommend doing that, approaching finding work that builds connection.
It's really a difficult one to answer perfectly and holistically, but I will say this. We have to be willing to sacrifice to get where we want to go, almost without exception. And many of us are just not willing to do it. Many of us are not willing to really think outside the box. I know when I was considering becoming a psychologist, I was very rigid, and my wife kept on saying, "Dude, I mean, honey, we can do this. We can do this." And I was just like, "No, we can't," because it'd be irresponsible. I really was very much wed to this idea that I had created my fate, and there was something really beautiful about me accepting my fate. And she's just like, "That is the dumbest thing you've ever said in your life." Um, and I had to really check in with myself. Are you willing to sacrifice? And what that meant in this case was a lot of nights and weekends were going to be allocated to studying. But the great news is we no longer need to go to traditional brick and mortar institutions. We can do a lot of our learning online or in hybrid systems. There are universities that are entirely virtual. There's some that are, again, hybrid. And are you willing to pay the price? Are you willing to say no to a lot of cool things in the immediate to say yes to something ultimately? And those of us who are that deeply committed to doing the thing have to be willing to leave the Shire, to borrow a little bit of Lord of the Rings here. Leave our comfort. Say no to a lot of things that we would like to say yes to. My wife went on a couple beautiful vacations with our then, 2-year-old son that I missed out on because I needed to write papers, go to class, all those things. It was a loss. When I look back, I do feel sad about not having gone to those things. And I feel unequivocal as well that I made the right choice because I also knew that I wanted to demonstrate for my son that work could bring immense amount of meaning and pleasure. And I did make sure to just get a lot of time with him as well. And I did, and to be very present while I was there. So that being said, we have more options than ever before. We need to attain a modicum of conviction before setting off outside the Shire. And we have to, be willing to really, really sacrifice to the gods and say, yes, I will say no to all of these awesome things because I'm saying yes to this thing. And there was a dictate that I used, and I would recommend it to everyone to think about what their version of this is. And it is, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. What is your main thing? And what does it mean that you have to say yes to and double down on? And what does it mean that you will say no to? Because when I was in school, it meant saying no to a lot of stuff that I wanted to say yes to because they were not part of the main thing. The main thing was to get my doctorate and to get licensed and to become a good psychologist. And that was that was in the professional front. On the family front was to spend as much time with my family as possible and to be there while I was there, not to be elsewhere. I wasn't perfect. There's a video of me looking down at my phone while I'm with my child. I'm not proud of that, but we've all had those moments. But fortunately, that was not characteristic. And the third thing was, for me at least, I had three main things, was my community. And that included my friends, that included the school that my kids went to and me serving on the board of the school, things like that. But everybody has to figure out what their main thing is, and everybody has a different main thing. And if you ask yourself in a very simple way, is this part of the main thing or is this not part of the main thing? That will help you as you sort out when you're considering an activity. And what are you willing to sacrifice to get there? And of course, the primary thing is doubling down on the thing that you have conviction, as much conviction as possible, that is the right path for you. That's the byproduct of a lot of soul searching and thought. One of the things I also recommend is talking to people who are in the profession that you're considering and asking them in an informational interview something akin to, what do you love about this? What do you hate about this? What do you wish you had known when you started this? The quality of your questions matter. In fact, quality of your questions in all things matter. And I heard from a very smart man once that the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life. So asking good questions is a big deal, whether they are external towards somebody who's doing a profession that you like, whether it's asking somebody if they want to get married, very important question, or whether you're engaged in your own self-talk when you can't find your wallet. I couldn't find my wallet a few weeks ago. And the first question, the knee jerk, was, how could you be such an idiot? Well, that doesn't help me find my wallet. That's a dumb question. And in fact, it's like asking on Google, if you can imagine a search bar in your head, how could I be such an idiot? Well, I will see a lot of evidence throughout my life of me being an idiot. That doesn't help me find my wallet. A better question would be, where was it last? Who else could you ask? How can you look through your calendar to see, where have you been? And I looked through my calendar, and lo and behold, I remembered 2 days prior, I had been at the tailor who was working on some trousers. And like how I use that word trousers instead of pants. Hey, English. So I called the tailor and I said, have you seen my wallet? She said, oh yes, I have it right here. I was thinking to myself, why didn't you call me? But I didn't say. I said, just thank you very much. And I drove over, got my wallet. But the quality of our questions definitely determines the quality of our life. And when we ask people who are in a profession that we are considering, that's probably one of our greatest data sources. And asking them good questions and figuring out what your questions are may help you double down on your conviction.
I love that. And I think it's Jack Canfield that said everything we want is on the other side of fear.
100%.
It's just so good to highlight it. And I think asking good questions is a great point, and could be quite difficult to do at times.
It's very difficult. Very difficult. In some ways it's simple but not easy, but it's very difficult for sure. And it requires us, getting outside of our comfort and saying, oh wow, I'm about to invite some challenge into this life. I'm about to increase the weights that I'm carrying through life for the sake of getting stronger.
Definitely. Having interviewed numerous experts on your own podcast, what are some of the most surprising insights that you've gained about human connection?
I love that question. I would have to go back to Stan Tatkin, who's one of my favorite couple therapists. He's he's a neuro geek who is just a relationship genius. One of my favorite minds in modern relationship psychology. And I mentioned it earlier, but just that idea that when we are with our one, we are in each other's care, and that we have to be able to, that's the title of one of his books, but that we are in a buddy cop film, that we have each other's back, that we are a co-regulating system, and that one of us at any given time must be regulated, because when both of us are dysregulated, that's when things get crazy and bad and wrong, and things just go down that one-wing spiral. And that one of us must be firmly grounded at any given time. And if both of us are not grounded, we need to take a break and recouple. I'm not talking about a break from the relationship entirely. I'm talking about anywhere from a minute to an hour cool down, and come back and say, let's re-meet in an hour when at least one of us can be grounded. So the idea that one person must be grounded at any given time, that's a very important piece. Another thought that I have would come from another relationship expert, and that would be Harville Hendrix. He is the creator of Imago Therapy. He and his wife, Helen LaKelly Hunt, I think have really made a massive contribution. His book, Getting the Love You Want, actually led to Oprah's very first Emmy Award. He's been on Oprah 13 times. He's brilliant. He's been on my podcast twice. I felt really honored that he endorsed my book and even contributed to the definition of connection in my book. One of the things he talks about is that one of us at any given time when we're trying to discuss something that could be challenging, he says that, sometimes talking is the most dangerous thing we can do. And there are good ways to do it and there are bad ways. And in his system, when we're talking about something heated, there's one person who's the speaker and there's one person who's the receiver. And you're nodding because I'm guessing you've heard of this style. My wife and I use this to great effect. We've been trained professionally and personally on how to use this, and we use it. And I can tell you, it's always as secure as I am in my relationship with my wife. It's always like, oh my gosh, what's she gonna say if she has something she needs to run by me? And I'm sure that when I say, honey, I need to run something by you in this manner, I'm sure she gets similarly like, but it always works. It always works. It's the most efficient way to deal with a very inefficient thing, and that is being heard. People can go through months, years, decades not being heard, lifetime not being heard. This system of hearing and checking in, and I'm not going to try to describe it too much, but where one person is a speaker and the other person just reflects back what is being said without any commentary, and ultimately saying, even if they don't agree with it, that it makes sense, that they're able to find something about what has been said that makes sense. Because what do we want more than anything else is to realize that, we've been heard and that what we've said makes sense, even if the other person disagrees, that there's something within that statement that makes sense. And that does not include, that does not give one person license to attack the other. That does not make sense. I'm not talking about attacking, but I am saying when the speaker speaks, I messages are used. When this happened, I felt this way. That's an I message. So that has been, so I would say, as important as connection, perhaps more important than connection, is the ability to reconnect. And through kind of what I was describing from Stan Tatkin, as well as Harville Hendrix, both of those are about reconnection.
I'll notice in my own version of that, particularly in the moment when there is something I want to say, usually not a skillful time to say it. Because if I do take some time, and I think this just depends on the reaction. If the reaction is strong, then the way that I would then speak about something, I would say is often unskillful. Whereas if I take a little bit of time, I reflect, maybe I write my thoughts down, it's like, oh, I can approach this conversation. And the way that you've put it is beautiful, like just taking the time for the other person to listen. And then you can get your point across in a way that the other person doesn't sort of recoil. The selfing mechanism tightens up. We dig our heels in. We do not listen at that point, I think. Particularly somebody that hasn't had any mind training, psychology training, or any know thyself reflections, it might be a very difficult to approach that. So I think it's such a good, it's a great practice in the way that you mention it. I think I was listening to a podcast the other day about something similar, and they put a timer on. It was like 5 minutes I speak, and then 5 minutes the other person spoke. So it was like they could get what they wanted to say out within a period of time, so that it was fair.
So both people were saying their versions, or were they listening to the other?
They were listening. Yeah, it
Okay,
would be like
good, because
unlisted
I think if
list. The person listens, and then vice
good,
versa.
good, because in my experience, and Harville Hendricks would agree. I mean, it's his idea, because so of course he would. It would be me agreeing with him. You know, we can either have a nice horizontal back and forth like we're playing tennis, or we can create a vertical wall between us. Like Josh, you know, you pissed me off the other day, and then you say, "Oh yeah, Adam. Well, 2 days prior to that, you pissed me off," and you know, it's like, oh God, we're building a wall between us rather than actually creating some form of actual communication.
Absolutely. So we live in an age of abundance, um, but we also live in a mental health epidemic. Most commonly, I think depression, anxiety, addiction, you name it. I think we have maximized all of the mental health issues currently.
Mm-hmm.
So, what common themes have you observed, and what advice would you offer to facing those challenges?
There is this paradox that you're describing. We are more connected than ever before, uh, electronically, and paradoxically, we are more isolated and lonely than ever before. We engage in social comparison. We look online because these little blue lights in our pockets that are so attractive, saying, "Feed me, look at me." It's our phones, and go onto any social media or Reddit, or just, you know, let's lose hours of our lives looking at the lives of others and being basically consumers rather than creators. And I would say, you know, and of course we know that, you know, the mental health crisis is huge, the loneliness. We People used to bowl with each other in the United States. No, they no longer really do that all that much. Bowling alleys are closing down. And what was so nice about bowling together was people from very different walks of life would meet up. Blue collar and white collar would connect, and they'd befriend each other regardless of political party. Now we're becoming more separate and more isolated, and we believe we're actually more different than we actually are. We're actually not all that different. We just joined these political parties, and it's been really sad. And we know that loneliness is as toxic to our health as smoking, you know, up to 15 cigarettes a day. And other cardiological measures are in some ways less relevant than our capacity to be in relationship. The Cambridge study has shown that, you know, it's the quality of our love that is really predictive of us living long lives, more than almost any other medical uh, data. So that being said, the first thing I would want to have people check themselves before they wreck themselves is over social comparison. The best way to feel crappy about something great in our lives is to look at it as somebody who's got it way better. MTV Cribs has done a disservice to the world. Seeing these homes of the rich and famous, l- living with the Kardashians, who have these fabulous lifestyles and these diamonds, um, everybody starts to want those things. And they actually feel a sense of injustice that they don't have them. One of the things that we also know is that we can hack into the system and not buy that. And one of the ways of doing so is doubling down on what's good in our own lives. I just got myself, for the very first time in my life, a new car. Was it a luxury item? To some. In my neighborhood, not. It's a Hyundai plug-in hybrid SUV. I freaking love this thing. It's new. It plugs in, uses a lot less gas, and it's just super cool. And I got rid of the OEM tires, and I put on some really sick Michelin tires that just oh, they're awesome. And one of the things I know for sure is that the cars around me in my neighborhood, this is not the car. This is not the belle of the ball. The other cars, the Mercedes, the Porsches, the Teslas, the other really sexy, fancy cars cost at least 2x what my car cost. And I could say, wow, where have I gotten in life? But one of the things I also know is that what we appreciate appreciates. And the more I appreciate that car, the more I come to love it and love my lot. I think there was something in the Bible that said something like, "Who is rich?" And it's the person who loves their lot. I love my car, and it's become kind of a family joke because at some point during a drive, I'll talk about how awesome the car is. No one ever knows what I'll say or how I'll say it or when it will be, but it will show up almost like Alfred Hitchcock in a movie. His face would his profile would often show up, always show up. It'll always make a cameo. So will my appreciation of my car. So appreciate what you've got. I'm not saying be complacent and not try to advance, but I am saying appreciate what you have. We know that gratitude changes the brain. The other thing is don't compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to yourself. You could compare yourself to, like, if I try to compare myself to Chris Hemsworth, it's not going to go very well for me. Me versus Thor, that guy's crushing it. At least it would seem to me. I don't know him personally, but he seems like a really cool person. Actually, I've actually read up on the guy. He seems like just a really, really nice kind human being. And like he's not all that impressed with being Chris Hemsworth. Although, like if I try to compare myself to, a Nordic god's abs, like these are never going to happen on me. If I try to compare myself to who knows, but if I compare myself to me yesterday or last week or last year or how I've been trending over the years, am I becoming more of the person I wish to become? That's the only measure that matters. Compare yourself to yourself. That would be one of my biggest things. The last but not least, I would say, if you're lonely, reach out. One of my clients said something so beautifully. Said, I'd rather be rejected and find friendship along the way than be lonely. Rejection hurts less than loneliness. We know that rejection hurts. Rejection hits the same parts of our brain as the pain centers of our brain, physical pain. But what he said was so brilliant. Be willing to be rejected for the sake of being less lonely and finding your people who get you. I guess last but not least, just to kind of piggyback off that, there was a great video that I'd recommend that everybody watch. Blind Melon. It's a song called No Rain. And in it, you see a girl tap dancing in a bee suit, and she gets laughed at. And she's walking through town dejected with people pointing at her until she finally gets to a park. And that's not going to ruin it by telling you what it looks like. That is full of people in bee costumes. You will cry when you see this. If you don't, check your pulse because you might not be breathing or something. It is so beautiful. And it speaks to our need to find our tribe. And we may be rejected along the way. It just means you haven't found your people. Find them.
Well, I will. We will. Thank you so much for sharing, Adam. That's been absolutely incredible. People are probably now wondering how to find out more about you and your work. Where would you recommend that we go?
Sure. Well, I've done a lot of work. I've been making up for a lot of lost time coming into my profession late as I did. But Google my name, Adam Dorsay, Dorsay. You'll see that I've got a website, and you'll see a lot of information about how to, if you live in the state of California and want to consider working with me. I've got an award-winning podcast with nearly 250 episodes to date, with such people as Golden State Warriors head coach Steve Kerr, Temple Grandin's been on. We've had all those relationship gurus that I mentioned, like Harville Hendricks and Stan Tatkin on multiple times. And it's just people have described it as a more personal version of Hidden Brain. I've got a book, as we've been talking about, super psyched, about the 4 ways we connect. I've also got 2 TEDx talks, one on men and emotions and one on friendship and adulthood. And I hope you'll check my stuff out.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, on behalf of me and the FitMind community, I think it's been a really, really good podcast. I've certainly learned a lot, and I really, appreciate the work you're doing. Keep going.
Thanks, my
It's
man.
very inspiring.
Oh, so much fun. Love being with you, Josh.
Again, thank you so much for listening to the episode. We really hope you enjoyed it. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say that we recently released a 30 days of meditation, science, and bliss course. You can find that here on YouTube or over at the app. We do find that the app offers a much better experience, and then you get daily reminders and you can really track your mental fitness. So highly recommend checking that out.